Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. Jack had always known trouble could come knocking, but he never expected it to arrive in a sleek black SUV with a smiling tyrant in designer heels. His land had been in his family for generations, untouched by outsiders, until the HOA decided it was theirs for the taking. They should have known Jack wasn't the surrendering type. Jack had lived on his 150-acre farm for as long as he could remember. The land had been in his family for generations, passed down from his grandfather, who had worked the soil with the same calloused hands that Jack now used to till, plant, and harvest. His days were filled with the rhythmic cycle of farm work, the sun dictating his schedule, the seasons shaping his life. It was a simple existence, but it was his, and he wouldn't trade it for anything. That was until the new HOA moved in. The trouble started subtly. A neatly typed letter arrived in the mail one morning, stamped with the official logo of the newly established Homeowners Association. Jack raised an eyebrow as he read it. The letter was an invitation, no, a request, for him to join their community association. It spoke in broad, flowery language about unity, shared responsibility, and maintaining property values. Jack chuckled at the absurdity. His farm had nothing to do with the sprawling, cookie-cutter suburban development that had cropped up on the outskirts of his land. He wasn't interested in any association telling him what to do with his property. He responded with a polite but firm refusal, mailing back a written letter stating he was not interested in joining the HOA. He had assumed that would be the end of it. A month passed, and another letter arrived. The wording was almost identical to the first, except this time there was an implied expectation that he should reconsider. Jack tossed the letter into the trash without responding. Then a third letter. This time the HOA was not just inviting him to join. They were making a proposal. They suggested that part of his land, particularly the portion nearest to their new development, was underutilized and could be better served as a recreational area for the community. Their plan included constructing a luxurious swimming pool, a lounge area with deck chairs, and a clubhouse. In exchange, they offered him what they described as a reasonable monthly payment. Jack's patience wore thin. This wasn't an offer, it was an attempt at coercion. He drafted a letter much less polite than his first, firmly stating that his land was not for sale, lease, or any kind of use outside of his own farming needs. He requested that the HOA cease all further communication with him. For a while, it seemed like his message had finally gotten through. The letters stopped coming, and Jack was left in peace. Then, 2 days after sending his final rejection, a car pulled up to his property. Jack had been outside checking his fences when he spotted the sleek, black luxury SUV rolling up his dirt driveway, its tires kicking up dust against the afternoon sun. He wiped his hands on his jeans and straightened as the vehicle came to a halt. The door swung open, and out stepped a woman who looked like she belonged on the cover of a high-end real estate magazine. She was dressed in an expensive blazer, her blonde hair perfectly styled in a sharp bob, oversized sunglasses perched on her nose. The way she carried herself radiated self-importance. Behind her, a tall man in a black security uniform stepped out, arms crossed over his broad chest. Jack exhaled slowly, already sensing trouble. The woman approached with a broad, artificial smile and extended a manicured hand. "Jack, is it? I'm Karen Masters, the president of the HOA. I wanted to stop by personally to discuss this little misunderstanding." Jack didn't take her hand. He simply nodded, his expression unreadable. Karen withdrew her hand smoothly, as if she had expected the snub, and continued, her tone airy and condescending. "You see, there's been quite a bit of confusion about your refusal to join our association. Everyone in the HOA is simply baffled as to why you wouldn't want to be a part of our wonderful community. And, well, we thought it might be best to have a face-to-face chat." Jack folded his arms across his chest. "Ain't no confusion. I told you in my letters. I'm not interested. This is my land, and I'm not looking to share it." Karen let out a soft, patronizing laugh. "Oh, Jack, you're making this sound so dramatic. This is a modern world. Communities work together. The HOA would bring you so many benefits: security, increased land value, better infrastructure, and you wouldn't even have to change a thing. You could keep farming, of course." Jack's jaw tightened. "Lady, I don't need security, and I sure as hell don't need anyone telling me what to do with my land." Karen's smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened just a bit. "Jack, I don't think you're quite understanding the opportunity here. This isn't about taking anything from you. It's about integrating. We all win." Jack took a step forward, voice firm. "Not interested. And I don't want you or anyone else from your HOA on my property again. Next time you come out here without permission, I'll consider it trespassing." Karen regarded him for a long moment before nodding slowly. Then, as if flipping a switch, she beamed again and took a step back. "Well, I certainly hope you reconsider. Either way, best of luck to you, Jack." With that, she turned on her heel, motioning for the security man to follow. Jack watched as they climbed back into the SUV and drove off, disappearing in a cloud of dust. Jack exhaled, shaking his head. He had a bad feeling about this. The days following Karen's visit were eerily quiet. Too quiet. Jack had half expected another letter, maybe even another visit, but nothing came. At first, he thought that perhaps his firm rejection had finally gotten through. Maybe the HOA had decided to leave him alone. Then, the strange occurrences began. It started with unfamiliar cars lingering near the edge of his property. At first, Jack assumed they belonged to lost travelers or curious onlookers admiring the farmland. But the pattern quickly became clear. The cars would stop near his fences, idling for a few minutes before slowly driving away. Some stayed longer, windows rolled up, silhouettes visible behind tinted glass. Others parked along the tree line, just out of direct sight, as if watching. One afternoon, Jack was repairing the fence near the northern edge of his land when he noticed a man standing just outside his property line, holding a clipboard and jotting down notes. The man barely acknowledged him when Jack called out, only muttering something about a survey before quickly leaving. Jack's gut told him that it wasn't just a coincidence. Then, the inspection started. The first was a surprise visit from a county zoning official claiming to be responding to an anonymous complaint about improper land use. The inspector poked around for nearly an hour, checking permits and zoning regulations, only to find nothing wrong. A few days later, a state agriculture official showed up unannounced, citing another anonymous report about potential contaminated soil. Again, nothing was found. Jack had been farming this land for years. He knew every inch of it, every blade of grass, every row of crops. The accusations were baseless, but they weren't stopping. Within a month, Jack had received 3 separate inspections, each one tied to vague, unfounded complaints. It was no coincidence. Someone was trying to make his life difficult. And then, there was the van. Jack first noticed it late one evening as he finished up feeding the livestock. The sky was darkening, the last traces of sunlight dipping below the horizon. As he wiped the sweat from his brow and started toward the house, he caught sight of something in the distance, a white utility van, half hidden behind the trees near his western property line. Its headlights were off, but he could see the faint glow of interior lights through the windshield. He stood there, watching. The van didn't move. Jack took a step forward, gripping the hammer in his hand a little tighter. Still, the van remained. It wasn't until he started walking toward it that the engine suddenly roared to life. Tires kicked up dirt as it peeled away, vanishing into the night. The next evening, it was back. This time, Jack was prepared. He had his flashlight and his rifle slung over his shoulder as he approached. But just like before, the moment he got too close, the van sped off. They were watching him. Whoever was behind this wanted him to know he was being watched. That night, Jack lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The strange cars, the inspections, the van lurking in the shadows. Someone was trying to rattle him. But who? He didn't need to think too hard about it. The HOA had gone silent after Karen's visit, but silence didn't mean surrender. As he turned onto his side, the distant hum of crickets and rustling leaves outside his window was suddenly interrupted by a faint, mechanical whirring. Jack frowned, sitting up. The noise was distant but unnatural, like an insect's buzzing amplified 100 times over. He climbed out of bed, grabbing the flashlight from his nightstand. Moving cautiously, he stepped out onto the porch. The farm was blanketed in darkness, the moon casting a faint glow over the fields. But high above, just barely visible against the night sky, a small red light blinked. A drone. Jack's jaw tightened. It was hovering directly over his property, circling slowly, its camera undoubtedly recording every inch of his land. He watched as it moved, tracing a deliberate path above his barn, his house, his fields. Whoever was controlling it wasn't just flying for fun. They were gathering information. A slow burn of anger spread through his chest. Enough was enough. Jack turned on his heels, stepping inside to grab his Remington 700. He moved quickly but methodically, loading around as he stepped back onto the porch. Taking a deep breath, he raised the rifle, aligning the scope with the floating intruder. One shot. A loud crack split the night, echoing across the empty fields. The drone jerked midair, its lights flickering wildly before it spiraled down, crashing into the tall grass near the tree line. Jack lowered his rifle, exhaling as the silence settled once again. But his victory was short-lived. In the distance, just beyond where the drone had fallen, headlights flared to life. The van. It had been there the entire time, hiding just out of sight. Jack didn't move as he watched the vehicle hesitate for just a moment before peeling away, disappearing down the dirt road. Whoever had been operating the drone hadn't expected him to fight back. Jack smirked. They had just made their biggest mistake. He slung the rifle over his shoulder and strode toward the fallen drone. It was a high-end model with a sophisticated camera and GPS tracker still attached. Jack picked it up carefully, inspecting the intact pieces. This wasn't just some hobbyist's toy. This was surveillance, and now he had proof. The following morning, Jack barely had time to drink his coffee before he heard the sound of tires crunching against the gravel driveway. He looked up from the kitchen table, peering out the window, and felt his jaw tighten. The same black luxury SUV that had appeared at his farm weeks ago was now pulling up to his porch. Jack sighed, already knowing who it was. He grabbed his phone and before stepping outside, casually pressed record. As expected, Karen Masters emerged, slamming the car door behind her with a force that betrayed her carefully composed demeanor. She was furious, her manicured nails gripping her expensive handbag with a white-knuckled intensity. But she wasn't alone. This time, she had brought two men with her, both dressed in business casual attire, but their broad builds and stiff postures screamed security. Jack stepped onto the porch, arms crossed, waiting for the storm to begin. Karen didn't waste a second. "How dare you!" she shrieked, marching toward him with her heels stabbing into the dirt. "You had no right to destroy HOA property." Jack raised an eyebrow. "HOA property? You mean the drone that was spying on me?" Karen scoffed. "Spying? Don't be so dramatic. That drone was simply mapping the area for future community development. You had no legal grounds to shoot it down, and now, thanks to your recklessness, you've stolen our equipment." Jack nearly laughed. "So let me get this straight. You claim that your drone, which was flying over my private property without my consent, was conducting business for the HOA. You do realize that's illegal trespassing, right?" Karen's expression faltered for just a second, but she recovered quickly, flipping her hair back with a forced chuckle. "Oh, don't be ridiculous. The drone wasn't doing anything wrong. And frankly, you're the one causing all these problems by being so difficult." Jack took a step forward, his voice calm but firm. "I don't owe you or your HOA a damn thing. My land isn't for sale, isn't for lease, and sure as hell isn't up for community projects. And since you seem so interested in the drone, well, you'll have to take it up with the police, because I turned it over to them last night." Karen's smile vanished. Her jaw tensed, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. "You called the police?" she repeated slowly. Jack nodded. "That's right, and they were very interested in why a private homeowners association was running unauthorized surveillance on someone who isn't even a member." Karen's fists clenched at her sides. "You're making a huge mistake, Jack. Do you have any idea who you're messing with?" Jack shrugged. "I think the better question is, do you?" Silence stretched between them. Her two security goons shifted uncomfortably, waiting for her next move. Finally, Karen exhaled sharply, regaining her composure. But this time, she didn't bother with the fake pleasantries. She glared at Jack, her voice dropping into a venomous whisper. "Listen, you stubborn old fool. You have one last chance to make the right decision. Either you sign the damn contract, lease us part of your land, and stop fighting this, or your peaceful little farm life is going to become a living hell." Jack didn't even flinch. He held her gaze, his voice steady. "If hell means never dealing with you again, I'll take my chances." Karen let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Fine, have it your way, but don't say I didn't warn you." With that, she turned on her heel, storming back to the SUV. The security goons followed, but before climbing in, she cast one last look at Jack. "You'll regret this," she hissed. Jack watched as the SUV sped down the road, dust kicking up in its wake. He had no doubt she meant those words, but Karen had made a critical mistake. She had threatened him on record. Jack looked down at his phone, still recording. He stopped it and saved the file. She thought she could scare him into submission, but now she had just given him more ammunition for the fight ahead. Jack had expected Karen to retaliate, but even he underestimated just how far she was willing to go. 3 days had passed since their last confrontation. He hadn't seen her SUV or any suspicious cars near his land, but he knew better than to assume she had backed down. She was planning something. He could feel it. That evening, Jack sat in his living room discussing the situation with his attorney, Michael Carter. Michael was a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer who had been handling land disputes for years. He had already begun gathering evidence for a potential lawsuit against the HOA. Letters, recordings, drone footage, everything that painted a picture of harassment and illegal activity. Honestly, Michael said, sipping his coffee, they don't have a legal leg to stand on. If they push this further, they're the ones who will end up in court. Jack nodded, but he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his gut. It wasn't just about legalities anymore. Karen wasn't playing fair. Then, the headlights appeared. Jack's head snapped toward the window as an SUV rolled up his driveway. His stomach tightened when he saw another black vehicle following closely behind. 2 cars. Not good. Michael frowned. Expecting company, Jack didn't answer. Instead, he reached for his phone and quietly started recording. The moment he stepped outside, Karen's voice cut through the cool evening air like a blade. "You coward! Running to your lawyer like a scared little child?" Jack stepped off the porch, hands resting at his sides. "I see you brought some friends," he said, eyeing the 2 large men standing beside her. They weren't just security goons. These men were built like enforcers. Karen smirked. "Well, since you insist on escalating things legally, I thought I'd come by one last time to offer you a way out." Jack said nothing. He already knew where this was going. "You're going to drop your lawsuit," Karen continued, her voice sickly sweet. "And in return, I'll make sure you don't regret this little misunderstanding. It's a win-win." Jack tilted his head. "And if I don't?" Karen's smile faded. She glanced at the 2 men beside her. "Then I'm afraid we'll have to handle things differently." One of the enforcers stepped toward Jack, cracking his knuckles. Jack exhaled slowly, glancing over his shoulder toward the house. He knew Michael was inside, listening. "Let me get this straight," Jack said, dragging out the moment. "If I don't back down, you're going to—" "What? Have your boys rough me up? Destroy my property?" Karen sighed dramatically. "Jack, you're making this so difficult. Why are you holding on to this stupid farm like it's some sacred ground? You could be making real money if you just played along. But no, you had to be stubborn. And now, well," she gestured toward her men, "now we have to do things the hard way." One of the enforcers lunged. Jack reacted on instinct, grabbing the nearest object, an old wooden shovel, and swung hard. The impact slammed into the first man's ribs, sending him stumbling backward with a grunt of pain. The second enforcer, however, was faster. Before Jack could react, a heavy fist collided with his jaw, sending him reeling backward. He barely had time to recover before he was tackled to the ground. Pain shot through his back as the weight of the enforcer pressed him down. A second later, the first man recovered and grabbed his arms, twisting them behind his back. Jack struggled, but they were stronger. Too strong. Karen crouched down beside him, smiling like a snake. "This could have been so much easier, Jack," she whispered. "But no, you just had to make me the villain." Jack spat at her feet. "You always were." Karen sighed and stood, dusting off her expensive jacket. "Tie him up, load him in the car. We'll make sure he learns his lesson." Jack's heart pounded. He knew what this meant. They weren't just going to rough him up. They were planning something worse. But before they could finish, the distant sound of sirens cut through the night. Karen's head snapped up, her eyes widening in shock. Jack let out a short, strained laugh. "Guess you took too long." The enforcers hesitated. Then, in an instant, chaos erupted. The first man bolted for the car. The second, still holding Jack down, released him and took off running. Karen, realizing what was happening, scrambled toward the SUV. "Get in! Get in!" Too late. Flashing red and blue lights flooded the driveway. Jack barely had time to sit up before 4 police officers swarmed in, weapons drawn. "On the ground! Now!" The enforcers dropped immediately. Karen, still by her SUV, tried to put on an air of innocence. "Officers, this is all a big misunderstanding." But Jack was already holding up his phone. "Got it all recorded," he said, shaking off the pain in his wrists. "Threats, assault, attempted kidnapping. It's all here." The lead officer didn't hesitate. "Karen Masters, you're under arrest." For the first time, Karen lost her composure completely. "What? You can't do this!" she shrieked, struggling as the officer pulled her hands behind her back. "I'm the victim here. This isn't fair." Jack slowly got to his feet, his muscles aching. He turned toward the house and saw Michael standing on the porch, phone still in hand. "You good?" Michael called. Jack grinned despite the bruises forming on his face. Never better. Karen, now fully in cuffs, turned her furious glare toward him. "This isn't over, Jack." Jack just chuckled. "Oh, I think it is." As the officers led Karen and her goons toward their cars, Jack exhaled deeply. The nightmare was finally coming to an end. But justice was just getting started. Jack sat in the back of the ambulance, letting the paramedic dab disinfectant on the cut near his temple. His ribs ached from the beating, but it wasn't anything he couldn't handle. What mattered was that Karen was in cuffs. From his seat, he could see the police officers securing the crime scene. The two goons had already been shoved into the back of a squad car, their heads down, avoiding eye contact. Karen, however, was still causing a scene. "You don't understand," she shrieked, struggling against the officer's grip as he guided her toward another cruiser. "This is a mistake. That man is a criminal. He attacked us. He stole our drone. I am the president of this community. Do you have any idea who I am?" The officer wasn't impressed. "Yeah, we do. And you're under arrest for attempted kidnapping, assault, and conspiracy to commit a crime. You have the right to remain silent." "This is harassment," Karen howled. "I will sue this entire police department. My lawyer will—" "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law," the officer continued, completely unfazed as he shoved her into the back seat and slammed the door shut. Jack smirked. Michael walked up to him, arms crossed. "Well, that was satisfying." Jack nodded. "Long time coming." The police had been thorough in their initial investigation. The moment Michael had called 911, he had made sure to forward all of Jack's recordings and documents, the letters, the drone footage, the threats. And when the officers arrived, they saw the tail end of the attack themselves. But the real gold mine came from the HOA's own records. After Karen's arrest, the police began digging into the HOA's operations, and what they found was a mess of illegal activity. Financial mismanagement. Karen had been embezzling HOA funds for years. Fraudulent land claims. The HOA had been attempting to forge documents claiming ownership over adjacent properties, including Jack's. Multiple reports of HOA harassment. Jack wasn't the first person they had tried to bully into submission. When detectives searched Karen's personal and HOA office files, they found proof of her involvement in the drone surveillance, the staged inspections, and even the anonymous complaints meant to get Jack shut down. By morning, the case against her was airtight. Jack received a call from Detective Ramirez, the lead investigator, later that day. "Just wanted to let you know," Ramirez said, his tone professional but clearly amused. "Karen Masters is completely screwed." Jack chuckled. "Music to my ears." "With all the evidence we've got," Ramirez continued, "the DA is looking to stack charges against her. It's not just assault and trespassing anymore. We're talking fraud, harassment, illegal surveillance, and attempted property theft." Jack leaned back in his chair, exhaling. "She really thought she was untouchable, huh?" "People like her always do," Ramirez said, "until they get caught." Jack glanced out the window at his farm, his land, his home. Karen had thought she could take it from him. Now she was the one losing everything. Jack sat in the front row of the courtroom, his hands folded calmly in his lap as he watched Karen Masters take her seat at the defendant's table. She looked nothing like the arrogant, untouchable HOA president she had once been. Gone were the expensive clothes, the polished confidence, and the smug superiority. In their place was a woman who knew she had already lost. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, her hands fidgeting in her lap as she whispered furiously to her attorney. The trial had been swift. With the overwhelming amount of evidence against her, Karen's defense had no leg to stand on. Jack had taken the stand, recounting the months of harassment, threats, and the attempted kidnapping in detail. The prosecution had played the recordings of her threats, displayed the documents proving fraudulent land claims, and presented witness testimony from other homeowners who had suffered under her HOA's reign. But the real nail in the coffin was the footage from the police body cams the night Karen had been arrested. Her hysterical threats, her attempt to spin the situation in her favor, and most damning of all, her own words caught on Jack's phone. Either you sign the damn contract, or your peaceful little farm life turns into hell. The jury had barely needed 2 hours to reach a verdict. Now, as the judge shuffled his papers and adjusted his glasses, the room fell into tense silence. "Will the defendant please rise?" the judge ordered. Karen slowly stood, her face pale, her hands trembling. The judge cleared his throat and delivered his sentence. 20 years in federal prison. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Karen let out a choked sob, her body swaying as if she might collapse. In addition, the judge continued, the court orders financial restitution to the plaintiff, Jack Carter, in the amount of $600,000, as well as damages to other affected homeowners. The defendant will also forfeit her role as president of the HOA, and a full investigation into the association's financial misconduct will proceed immediately. Karen let out a strangled scream. "This isn't fair," she shrieked, turning to her lawyer, who simply avoided her gaze. "I was only doing what's best for the community. You can't do this to me." The judge rapped his gavel. "Order in the court." Karen's outburst didn't matter. The verdict was final. Jack exhaled slowly, feeling months of stress and frustration finally lift from his shoulders. As the bailiffs moved in to escort Karen away, she turned toward Jack with pure hatred in her eyes. "This is your fault," she spat. "You think you've won. You think you've beaten me?" Jack simply smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Looks that way, doesn't it?" Karen screamed in frustration as she was dragged from the courtroom, her shouts echoing down the hall. It was over. Outside, Jack stepped into the fresh afternoon air, feeling the sun on his face. Michael clapped him on the back. "Well, I'd say that went about as well as we could have hoped." Jack nodded. "Better, actually. Think the HOA will keep bothering you?" Jack let out a chuckle. "Not after this. They'll be too busy trying to save their own asses once the financial investigations start." Michael grinned. "So, what's next?" Jack looked out over the distant fields of his land. His land. For the first time in months, it truly felt like his again. "I think I'll just enjoy my farm," he said simply. "No HOA, no drones, no lunatics trying to take what's mine. Just me, my land, and a quiet, peaceful life." Michael smirked. "Sounds good to me." Jack exhaled, finally free from the chaos that had plagued him for months. Karen was gone. The HOA was crumbling, and his farm, his home, was safe. He walked back toward his truck, the weight of the past finally behind him. For the first time in a long time, he was at peace.